things, so that's not going to do any work.
No, abstract things don't explain concrete things.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to say here is that so picture there being an infinite past of contingent events, each one causing the subsequent one. Then no contingent fact is unexplained, because as I just said, each one is explained by the previous one. Then it seems to me all you're left with is saying, well, what about the whole sequence, right? What explains that? And I'm just going to say that the explanation of the whole thing is just the conjunction of the explanations of each of the individual things. So
yeah, but I mean that's Hume's objection, right? And
yeah, and I don't think anyone ever really gave a good rebuttal.
I mean,
so yeah, I'm just trying to understand the overall picture. It seems like we have an infinite amount of things in Alex's framework, all of which are contingent, and it's this kind of chain of one explaining the other.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering if you it seems like you're not accepting the strong PSR. I don't know if you would endorse the weak PSR, or what sort of principle are you working with, or you just don't have any principle at all?
Well, I mean, let's just be so quite clear about it. I'm not really saying I think this is true, but I guess I'm saying I don't see how you ruled this option out, right? To prevent the argument going through, you just need to have one of the various sort of horns that were presented at the beginning still on the table, and you haven't managed to argue by elimination to the necessity of the necessary cause version instead. So I'm not saying I believe this is my view. I'm just saying what's wrong with this view. So it's a strong PSR view. Every contingent event strongly explains the next one. And there's just infinitely many of them, and there's no stopping point. And then the classic objection to this is something like, yeah, but what explains the whole sequence? Or why this whole sequence rather than some other whole sequence? And I guess my reply was saying, well, the explanation of the whole sequence is just the conjunction of each of the elements themselves. So what explains P, it's Q. What explains Q, it's R, blah, blah, blah. So the explanation of the whole sequence just basically is the individual explanations for each element in the sequence. Now, if that's right, then there's nothing that's not explained. Each thing is explained. Each part of the whole is explained. And if each part of the whole is explained, then the whole is explained. And I was arguing, well, I mean, I guess I was saying, look, if you think that in general, whenever you have a set or something that's got elements to it, that you have to have more than just the explanation of each of the individual parts to have an explanation of that whole, then I deny that principle. And here's the counterexample: me having coffee for breakfast and Caesar wearing one slipper. It's implausible to suppose that there's some third thing which explains that, apart over and above the individual explanation for my having coffee and the individual explanation for Caesar wearing one slipper. Once you've given those two explanations, that's it. You're done. There's nothing else to say about it. Right? Each strong PSR is satisfied. There's no contingent thing left.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to be clear on. So then you are accepting the strong PSR in your explanation.
But because what I'm doing is I'm agitating against the argument. I'm saying, let's suppose the strong PSR is true, but how did you eliminate this idea that there's a never-ending sequence of explanations? Because in order for the argument to be successful, you have to eliminate all of the other options. It's an argument by elimination, right?
Yeah, I get that, but I'm asking at this point, because I've been listening for quite a while. I'm asking at this point if that's the view you. Obviously, I'm not saying that you have to commit to it, but I'm saying is that the view that you lean towards? Or are you just responding this way in virtue of the argument, and you really have no confidence in strong PSR whatsoever?
Yeah,
that's what I'm asking.
Yeah. That's right. It's an instrumental invocation of the principle for the purposes of arguing against the success of this contingency argument. It's not like I believe in it myself.
Yeah. So my question is then, what's your actual position on the strong PSR?
Well, I mean, so as I said in the first place, this kind of modal collapse argument makes you think that either the strong PSR is false, or everything is necessary, or, well, yeah, no, actually that's it. It's either the strong PSR is false or everything is necessary. So if I have to pick out of those two, I guess I don't think everything is necessary. I mean, I guess I reject strong PSR just because otherwise I feel like I have to accept that everything is necessary, and that seems wrong. So
well,
if you put
why
gun to my head, then I would pick the strong PSR as false.
Well, why is that? Given what you've just said, the explanation you gave seemed to affirm the strong PSR, and yet everything is contingent, not everything is necessary.
Well, I mean, okay, that's fair. So I suppose there's another kind of dimension to the strong PSR. The first one is that explanation is necessitating. Okay, what's the right way to put this then? So then, yeah, so I suppose what I'm saying is, if you think that, okay, so here's another way to put this, right? Okay, let me try and be a bit more explicit about it. I guess what I'm saying on this Humean view, that there's a never-ending or never-beginning sequence of contingent events, each one that explains the next, is that you do just say there's no explanation of the totality of contingent reality. That's just unexplained. But you deny that what I was trying to do is sort of deny that the original motivation pushes you to that second claim that you have to accept, you have to explain the whole of contingent reality. But let's suppose, so I suppose what I'm saying is that the strongest version of the PSR has both of the explanation is entailment and the whole of contingent reality has that type of explanation. Now, that if you hold both of those things, then you get this Vanning-Wagen argument, which is effectively that suppose within this like shape here, the circle or something I'm drawing, has the whole of contingent reality, and absolutely every contingent fact, right, is contained within this area. Now, if that has a necessitating explanation for it, then it can't be from a contingent thing. It has to be from a necessary thing, because we just said every contingent thing is within this area, and also self-explanation seems incoherent, right? So I guess that's another aspect to this. I'm assuming self-explanation is incoherent, but that seems pretty obvious. But then it follows that the explanation must be necessary. If explanation is a necessitation relation, then because every consequence of a necessary fact is necessary.
Alex, maybe if you can clarify before you carry on, maybe clarify that last point, because it seems like the infinite series of contingent things, it seems like that's a self-explanation, at least when I'm asking why do contingent things exist.
Well, no, but here's the point that I'm confused about. So it seems like you said two different things, right? And that's why I introduced this third option. On the one hand, it seemed like you were trying to say, well, there is no such thing as the conjunction of everything, of all the parts. You know, they are explained by the individual members, right? But then on the other hand, when I'm asking for your view and you bring this point up, I said, well, it seems like you're affirming the strong PSR and everything is explained. But then he said, well, wait, let me think about that more. No, actually, the thing which is the totality is unexplained over and against others. So it's okay. It seemed like you slid back and forth kind of.
I think that's fair enough. I think that I may have been.
So no, that's fine. I guess I'm saying, which one are you really going with at this point? Just so I can understand what the theory is, because they're two different theories, right? I mean,
yeah. Okay. So I think what I was doing in the first place was like playing the game of like, what do I think? Like, what's going on? What's the analysis, a fruitful analysis of the argument? And now, secondly, you're saying to me, but what do you actually think? So I think it's slightly different questions, and it's reasonable to ask that second question. And I think now I'm focusing on that second question rather than the first one. It's reasonable because it's bringing out something that I hadn't really spent enough time explaining the first time around. So fair enough. So the first time round, I was saying, well, look, I dispute the requirement for this like additional explanation or something. But I think it's fair enough if I'm picking a view, to be honest, about like, yeah, I guess what happens is on that view I was explaining, you do just have to say that we're just not endorsing the requirement for an overall explanation. But the reason why I reject the strongest possible PSR is because if you include that requirement to explain all of causal, all of contingent reality, absolutely everything, with an entailment relation, then the Van Inwagen argument shows you that the thing doing the explaining has to be necessary, because the thing being explained is all of contingent reality. The only thing left is necessary. And if the explanation relation is a necessitation relation, then it follows logically that that there is no contingent reality at all, because the logical consequences of necessary truths are themselves necessary. There's no contingent logical consequence of a necessary truth. And so that is some of the most strong version of modal collapse that you get. And now the way out of that is to suppose that there's some contingent thing that's not explained by the PSR, the very strongest PSR, or that everything is necessary, or that the strongest version of the PSR is false. And I just don't see that you can chart a course between those. So do you follow that chain of reasoning?
Yeah, I do. But so now what I'm saying is, now we're back to the two options instead of this other third option in which everything is contingent and everything is explained. Now we're back to, well, there's something that's fundamentally contingent that isn't explained, or everything is necessary. That's kind of where we're at now. That's so. But then I go back to my original question: what sort of explanatory principle are you dealing with? Because if you're at that point, if you're not accepting because you're saying, well, if I have those two options, the one of everything being necessary just seems more absurd than the other option.
Yeah.
So it seems like you're leaning more towards that one, which then would entail a rejection of the strong PSR, which then goes back to my original question: what explanatory principle would you be operating with?
Well, I mean, if you have